So the last story for today is called The House on East 88th Street. The title's on the spine, where a lot of titles, you'll find most titles are on the spine and on the front of the book. This one's had a cover over it, but we have since lost the cover. Nevertheless, even if you lose the cover, the book is still fun to read. The images in this book are very simple. It seems to be painted, but there's not a lot of colors used. And the reason is because this book was originally written in 1962, and when they printed books, they had less sophisticated colors, and they usually used 4 colors, yellow, red, blue, and magenta really, and cyan, to make all the colors that were in the page. So they had to keep their colors more simple, or a limited palette, I should say. This right here is the house. This is a house. It's the house on East 88th Street, and that's in Manhattan. It's empty now, but it won't be for long. Strange sounds come from the house. Can you hear them? Swish, swash, splash, swoosh. It had been one sunny morning when Citywide Storage and Moving Company truck pulled up to the house on East 88th Street and unloaded the belongings of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph P. Prim and their son Joshua. It was a trying day for everyone. Mrs. Prim just couldn't decide where to put the piano, and Mr. Prim's favorite pipe was accidentally packed away in one of the dozens of cartons lying about. Swish, swash, splash, swoosh. Loudly and clearly the sounds now rumbled through the house. "It's only a little thunder," Mrs. Prim assured everyone. When a Citywide Storage and Moving man carried their potted pistachio tree, everyone rejoiced. The truck was at last empty. The movers wished them well and hurried off to the next job for the day. "Now I'm going to prepare for lunch," announced Mrs. Prim. "But first I want to go upstairs and wash my grimy hands." Swish, swash, splash, swoosh. A puzzled Mrs. Prim stopped to listen. By and by, her ears directed her to the bathroom door. "What can it be?" she asked herself as she opened the door. What do you think it could be? What she saw made her slam it quickly shut. Mrs. Prim knew she was going to scream and just waited for it to happen. But she couldn't scream. She could scarcely even talk. The most Mrs. Prim was able to manage was a sharp, hoarse whisper of a voice, which she used to call Mr. Prim. "Joseph," she said, "there's a crocodile in the bathroom." Mr. Prim looked into the bathroom. Indeed, look at that. Can you imagine buying a new house and having a crocodile there? The next moment found them flying in different directions. "Help, help," Mrs. Prim cried out as she struggled with the window that was stuck with fresh paint. "Operator, operator," Mr. Prim shouted into the telephone, and then remembered that it was not yet connected. Joshua, who heard everything, raced to the front door, only to be greeted by an oddly dressed man who handed him a note. "This will explain everything about the crocodile," said the man, leaving quietly but swiftly. Mr. Prim read the note. "Please be kind to my crocodile. He is the most gentle of creatures and would do no harm to a flea. He must have tender, loving care, and he is an artist that can perform many good tricks. Perhaps he will perform some for you. I shall return, cordially, Hector P. Valentini, star of stage and screen. P.S. He will only eat Turkish caviar. P.P.S. His name is Lyle." Turkish caviar indeed, said Mrs. Prim. Oh, to think this could happen on East 88th Street. Whatever will we do with him? Suddenly, before anyone could think of a worthy answer, there was Lyle. And just as suddenly, he got a hold of a ball that had been lying among Joshua's belongings and began to balance it on his nose and roll it down the notches of his spine. Now he was walking on his front feet and taking high leaps, flying leaps. Now he was twirling Joshua's hoop, doing it so expertly that the Prims just had to clap their hands and laugh. Lyle bowed appreciatively. He had won his way into their hearts and into their new home. Oh, everyone needs a pet crocodile. Everyone's home should have a crocodile, said Mrs. Prim one day. That's just what I said. Lyle is now one of the family. He loves helping out with chores. He won't allow anyone else to carry out the old newspapers or take in the milk. He folds towels, he feeds the birds, and when he sets the table, there is always a surprise. I only had to show him once how to make up a bed. People everywhere stop and talk with him. They say he's the nicest crocodile they have ever met. Lyle likes to play in the park, and he always goes once around in the pony cart. Now he has learned to eat something besides Turkish caviar. Italian ices, that's the way to go. Lyle is a good sport, and everyone wants him to play on his side. He's wonderful company. We take him everywhere. Just give him his Turkish caviar and his bed of warm water, and he is happy as a bird. That sounds like everything is great on East 88th Street. One day, a brass band paraded past the house on East 88th Street. The Prim family rushed to the window to watch. They called for Lyle, but there was no answer. Oh no. Look, someone pointed out. It's Lyle. He's in the parade. There he was. There was Lyle doing his specialty of somersaults, flying leaps, walking on his front feet, and taking bows, just as he did on the first day they laid eyes on him. The people watching cheered him on, while Lyle smiled back and blew them kisses. A photographer was on hand to take pictures. The next day, Lyle was famous. The telephone rang continually, and bundles of mail were dropped by the door. One letter was from someone Lyle knew particularly well. Mr. Prim read it. Just a few words to say I shall return. Cordially, Hector P. Valentini, star of stage and screen. P.S. Very soon. P.S. P.P.S. To fetch my crocodile. Several days later, Mrs. Prim and Lyle were in the kitchen shelling peas when they heard a knock at the door. It was Hector P. Valentini, star of stage and screen. I have come for Lyle, announced Signor Valentini. You can't have Lyle, cried Mrs. Prim. He's very happy living here, and we love him dearly. Lyle must be returned to me, insisted Signor Valentini. Was it not I who raised him from young crocodilehood? Was it not I who taught him his bag of tricks? We've appeared together on stages all over the world. But then why did you leave him alone in a strange house? Asked Mrs. Prim. Because, answered Signor Valentini, I could no longer afford to pay for his Turkish caviar. But now Lyle is famous, and we shall be very rich. Mrs. Prim was saddened, but she knew Lyle properly belonged to Signor Valentini, and she had to let him go. It was a tearful parting for everyone. Signor Valentini had big plans for Lyle. They were to travel far and wide, stay in many hotels, where sometimes the tubs were too big, other times they were too small, or too crowded. Signor Valentini did what he could to coax a smile from Lyle. He tried making funny faces at him. He stood on his head. He tickled his toes and told him uproarious stories that in happier days would have had Lyle doubled over with laughter. But Lyle could not laugh, nor could he make people laugh. He made them cry instead. One night in Paris, he made an entire audience cry. The theater manager was furious and ordered them off his stage. Meanwhile, on East 88th Street, Mrs. Prim went about her work without her usual bright smile, and deep sighs could be heard coming from behind the newspaper Mr. Prim was reading. Oh. Every morning, Joshua anxiously awaited the arrival of a mailman in hope of receiving word from Lyle. One morning, a letter did come. He knew the handwriting very well. Just a few words to say we shall return. Cordially, Hector P. Valentini, former star of stage and screen. P.S. I am sick of crocodiles. P.P.S. and the tears of crocodiles. Not too many days later, the Prims were delighted to find Hector P. Valentini and Lyle at their door. Here, take him back, said Signor Valentini. He is no good. He will never make anyone laugh again. But Signor Valentini was very much mistaken. Everyone laughed and laughed and laughed, and in the end, so did Signor Valentini. So now, if you happen to be walking past the house on East 88th Street, and if you should happen to hear the sounds that go swish, swash, splash, swoosh, don't be surprised. It's only Lyle the crocodile.